Hello there, I am Gilbert Stewart, and I am an artist. I'm so glad you decided to join us on our tour, Night at the Art Museum. Over the course of our tour, you will learn about 3 extremely influential American artists. Here are their stories. As I have said, my name is Gilbert Stewart. I was born in Rhode Island. During my life, I would create nearly 1,000 portraits, most of them famous world leaders such as King George III and Louis XVI, the first 5 presidents of the United States, and the first 5 first ladies, including my well-known portraits of John and Abigail Adams. In my portrait of John Adams, I used soft brushstrokes to show lushness and wealth. I also painted the president looking directly at the viewer, which openly indicates his somewhat frank personality, one of the first times a person's true attitude was shown in portraiture. As a young man, I had displayed a great aptitude for painting. In 1770, I met my first tutor, Cosmo Alexander, a Scotsman on tour in the then colonies. Alexander took me to England in 1771, but after his sudden death, I was forced to return to the colonies due to a lack of funds. However, I was soon to return to England as the outbreak of the American Revolution threatened my livelihood as a painter. This time I studied under Benjamin West, and by 1782 I had become very well known due to the success of my first full-length portrait, The Skater. The Skater is a portrait of William Grant, a Scottish lawyer, skating on a pond in Hyde Park. The fact that I painted Grant skating was significant, as motion was generally not depicted in the portraits of the time. This, coupled with certain details such as the high quality of Grant's skates, signifying wealth, and his idealized athleticism, served to bring me recognition for my high-quality, innovative portraiture. In fact, at the 1782 Royal Academy exhibition, my painting was displayed in a coveted central position, high on the wall for all to see. My success and a steady flow of commissions allowed me to settle down into a very lavish lifestyle. Unfortunately, my lavishness led me to fall into massive debts, so I left England for Ireland and then, in 1793, came back to America. I set up a studio in Philadelphia, and it was here that I painted perhaps my most famous painting, a portrait of George Washington called the Athenaeum, which I never finished. Even though I never finished it, the Athenaeum was still a very important painting. During that time period, many people wanted to own cheap copies of portraits of famous Americans to put in their homes. This painting was the culmination of a series of portraits of Washington. I deliberately stopped after painting his face in order to make it easier to copy. However, the portrait was still praised for being extremely lifelike, realistically showing Washington's various skin tones, which are difficult to paint in general. This realism, along with Washington's popping blue eyes, made my portrait extremely popular and personal, one of the first to be widely distributed. In fact, it became the basis for the picture of Washington that appears on the modern dollar bill. In 1805, I moved to Boston, where I lived until my death at the age of 72. Overall, I had a large impact on my contemporaries, developing the techniques by which we could portray our subjects as realistically as possible, and by incorporating much underlying meaning, such as the subject's personality, into our works. I will now turn the tour over to my fellow innovating artist, Thomas Cole.
Thanks, Gil. As he said, I'm Thomas Cole, and in England in 1801 I was born. In 1818, I emigrated to the United States with my family, where I began to learn to paint. I would eventually become the founder and leader of the Hudson River School, the first truly American art movement. Though I originally painted portraits, in 1825 I began to paint landscapes after I visited the Catskill Mountains. That same year, I displayed some of my works in a New York bookstore, where I drew the attention of portraitist John Trumbull, who encouraged me to obtain formal training. So, in 1829, I returned to England to formally study art. I studied for 2 years, then returned to America, this time displaying my new art painted in Europe in an art gallery. At this exhibition, I met Luman Reed, a wealthy merchant who became my patron. He commissioned me to paint a series of paintings called The Course of Empire. The Course of Empire is perhaps my most famous work. It is a series of 5 paintings that depict the progression of a civilization from its beginning to its destruction. The first painting, The Savage State, depicts a land before the rise of civilization. I used much chiaroscuro and cloudy scenery to give the painting a mysterious air, a quality that became characteristic of the Hudson River School. Finally, I used superb detail in this piece, another way in which I developed the style of American landscapes, which try to capture every single thing in the scene, as opposed to the holistic, romantic art of Europe. The third work in my series, The Consummation of the Empire, is a departure from the natural themes of the first 2 paintings. It focuses more on architecture and depicts a prosperous and thriving society full of people. This is practically the opposite of what I normally painted, but it showed my versatility as an artist within the series, while maintaining my attention to detail. My series' fourth work, Destruction, depicts the collapse of the civilization in the last painting. I intended this work as a prophetical warning to the American people, because to many sagacious observers, America was the subject of the work. Once again, I used much detail in this painting and depicted darkness covering the land once more in order to elicit an emotional response from the viewer. My last painting, In the Course of the Empire, Desolation, shows what happens to nature once man is gone. The land returns to its natural state, and only ruins remain. This piece is more characteristic of the Hudson River School, as there is a greater sense of natural wonder. The Course of Empire, which I finished in 1836, was the first major American work of art with significant underlying meaning. It warned Americans with the desire for expansion to respect the wilderness that I loved so much, or risk dire consequences. Later that same year, I painted The Oxbow, another extremely well-known work. I painted the oxbow while working on The Course of Empire, and exhibited it at the National Academy of Design in 1836. The oxbow has an incredibly detailed foreground, as seen in my self-portrait that I painted in the center of the painting, a first in American art, and very unusual for landscapes. The painting is also a good example of how I painted en plein air, meaning I painted while out in nature, as opposed to recalling the landscape later. In 1843, I opened an art studio in which I taught aspiring young artists. Together, my students and I painted in the style that became known as the Hudson River School, due to our location in New York and our emphasis on painting romanticized landscapes. Alas, in 1848, I died. However, my paintings were instrumental to art as we know it, as it led to the creation of the Hudson River School. While it drew many influences from romantic art, it was unique in its own sense, because it depicted the wilderness of America. Again, I painted during a time in which America was expanding, and my paintings showed viewers the inherent beauty of the lands of America. And now, for the final leg of our tour, I bring you another artist who revolutionized art, John James Audubon.
My name is John James Audubon, and in 1785, I was born as the illegitimate son to a sea captain and a Haitian Creole. In 1789, I moved to France to start my education. However, I really disliked schooling, and at many times I was caught skipping class following activities I found more interesting, such as hunting and fishing.
I was very much spoiled as a child. As a result of my behavior, my father sent me to America as punishment, where I moved to a farm near Philadelphia. Yet, I still spent much time enjoying the great outdoors, and I thus neglected to establish a lumber mill, as my father had wished me. As my job prospects were now very slim, in the early 1800s, I decided to become an ornithologist, someone who studies birds for a living. I felt this job fit well with my love for the outdoors. In 1826, I published my most famous work, Birds of America. This book was a collection of over 400 of the ornithological drawings I had done up to that point. Upon publication, my book became extremely popular among the elite of English and European society, who were constantly clamoring for information about, among other natural things, the exotic wildlife of America. One of the first works in the series, The Golden Eagle, was just such an animal. I personally believe that the golden eagle should have been the national bird of the United States, not the bald eagle. When painting the golden eagle, I tried to express the sense of power I felt it exhibited while hunting. Thus, when they saw it, some critics believed that I intended to dead rabbit in the eagle's claw to symbolize the defeat of Great Britain in the Revolutionary War. The many paintings in my book were not extremely detailed. They depicted many different North and South American animals in their natural habitats, combined with backgrounds of panoramic landscapes. These were the most accurate drawings of American wildlife to date, compared to earlier works, which were mainly basic sketches done by frontiersmen such as Lewis and Clark. This attention to detail can be seen in my painting of the passenger pigeon. I felt an extremely strong connection to this bird, as it was threatened by overhunting and would later go extinct. I used exquisite detail, especially to depict the tiny lichens on the tree bark and detailed feather patterns of the birds themselves. This painting proved useful to future scientists who believed to use my work as scientific reference because of its detail, long after the pigeon became extinct. Viewers and critiques alike were also struck by the seemingly human-like qualities of the birds I depicted. I achieved this by inserting wires into the bodies of the animals I used as models in order to make them look as realistic as possible. This was a revolutionary technique that would later be copied by not only other Orientologists, but all manner of natural historians and natural history museums. I died on January 27, 1851. However, my work had drastically changed the artistic and especially the scientific community. As I stated, Birds of America greatly increased the standards by which paintings of animals were created. No longer just anatomically incorrect sketches, future paintings continued my drive for painful accuracy, now accepted as a standard.
And this concludes our Night at the Art Museum tour. My fellow artists and I hope that the tour was informative and that you come away not only with a greater appreciation of us, but with early American art in general. Thank you for joining us.